My son left me at a roadside motel that smelled like stale smoke and broken promises. He wouldn't look me in the eye when he said it was just for one night. But I knew that tone. I had heard it once before when he was a teenager trying to lie his way out of trouble. Only this time, I was the problem he wanted to get rid of. I was still holding my purse when he stepped backward toward the door, and then the clerk looked up, froze, and said my name like she had been waiting years to see me again. Ethan went pale. Before we go on, if this moment already made your heart tighten, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had someone you trusted suddenly feel like a stranger? Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. And if stories like this speak to you, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can walk through the rest of this together. I suppose the strangest thing about betrayal is not the moment it happens, but how long it takes you to realize it has been happening all along. My name is Nicole West. I'm 67 years old, and until recently, I believed I had lived a good, steady life. Not perfect, no life ever is, but honest. I was married to my husband Robert for 42 years. We built everything together from scratch. He ran a small hardware store in Savannah, Georgia, and I spent most of my life working part-time and volunteering church programs, literacy groups, anything that made me feel useful. Robert used to say I had a way of making people feel seen. I held on to that thought for a long time after he died. It's been 2 years now, but grief doesn't follow a calendar. It doesn't shrink just because time passes. It settles into the quiet corners of your day, into the empty chair at the breakfast table, into the silence of a house that used to feel full. After Robert passed, the house became too much. Not physically at first, but emotionally. Every room felt like a memory I couldn't escape. The creak of the stairs, the smell of his aftershave still lingering in the bathroom cabinet. I would walk from one room to another just to feel something, but all I found was absence. That's when Ethan stepped in. My son has always been practical. Even as a child, he liked things neat, organized, predictable. After the funeral, he came down from Macon more often. At first, I was grateful. He handled paperwork I didn't understand, spoke to insurance companies, helped me sort through documents Robert had left behind. "Mom, you don't need to carry all this alone," he told me one afternoon, standing in the middle of my living room with a stack of folders in his hands, and I believed him. Looking back now, I think that was the moment things began to shift. Not suddenly, not in a way that would alarm anyone. Just a quiet change in direction, like a door slowly closing behind me without a sound. It was Ethan who suggested I sell the house. "You don't need all this space anymore," he said gently. "It's too much to maintain. Too many memories, too. You deserve a fresh start." A fresh start. Those words sounded comforting at the time, like a promise. He and his wife Lauren lived in Macon, about 2 hours away. They had a nice home in a quiet neighborhood with a small guest suite behind the main house. "You could stay with us for a while," Ethan offered. "Just until you figure out what you want next. We'd feel better having you close." That word mattered to me. I didn't want to be alone anymore. Not really. And the idea of being near family, of hearing voices in the house again, of having someone to share dinner with felt like something I needed, even if I didn't want to admit it out loud. So I agreed. Selling the house was harder than I expected. I tried to be practical about it the way Ethan was. But when the final papers were signed and I handed over the keys, I felt something inside me quietly break. That house wasn't just wood and walls. It was my life, my marriage, my memories, and I had just let it go. Ethan handled most of the financial side. He helped me set up a new account, transferred the proceeds from the sale, and assured me everything was safe and organized. "There's a lot to manage here, Mom," he said. "Let me take care of it for now. You don't need to stress over details." At the time, that felt like kindness. Now I understand it was something else. When I moved to Macon, Ethan made sure everything seemed easy. He drove down with a rented truck, packed my things efficiently, and kept the mood light with small talk I didn't have the energy to return. Lauren greeted me with a polite smile when we arrived. "Nicole," she said, giving me a brief hug that felt more like a formality than affection. "We've set up the suite for you." The guest suite was small but clean. A bedroom, a bathroom, and a little sitting area with a window that looked out onto the backyard. It wasn't home, but it was something. "You'll be comfortable here," Ethan said, setting my suitcase down. And I nodded because I didn't know what else to say. The first few weeks passed quietly. I tried to settle into a new routine. I would wake up early, make my own coffee, and sit by the window. Sometimes I would read. Sometimes I would just watch the light change across the yard. Ethan was busy with work. Lauren worked part-time and kept mostly to herself. We would have dinner together occasionally, but those moments felt careful, like everyone was choosing their words too deliberately. Still, I told myself it was normal. We were adjusting. They had their lives, and I didn't want to disrupt that. Ethan started helping more with my day-to-day matters. "Did you take your medication?" he would ask. "Let me handle that phone call for you. I'll go with you to the appointment. It's easier that way." At first, I appreciated it. It felt reassuring to have someone take charge when my thoughts were still clouded with grief. But slowly, almost without noticing, I began to step back. He opened my mail before I saw it. He answered questions on my behalf. He kept track of things I used to manage myself. "You don't have to worry about that anymore," he would say. And I let him, because part of me believed that maybe I wasn't as sharp as I used to be. Maybe grief had made me slower, more forgetful, less capable. There were small moments that unsettled me, though. Once I went looking for a bank statement I was sure had arrived, but it wasn't in the usual place. "Did you move this?" I asked Ethan. He barely glanced up from his phone. "I probably filed it somewhere." "Don't worry about it, Mom. Filed it where I didn't press further." Another time the pharmacy called, but Ethan picked up before I could reach the phone. "It's handled," he told me afterward. "They just needed to confirm something. I didn't know what." And then there were the little comments. "Mom's been a bit forgetful lately," I overheard him say to Lauren one evening when they thought I was in my room. "She left the stove on yesterday," he added. I froze when I heard that, because I hadn't. I was certain of it. But certainty doesn't feel as strong when someone you trust speaks with confidence. It starts to waver, to bend. Maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I just didn't remember. That thought stayed with me longer than I care to admit. Looking back now, I can see how subtle it all was. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would raise alarm if you looked at any single moment on its own. But together they formed something else entirely. A slow erosion of confidence, of independence, of self. And the hardest part, I didn't fight it, because I thought my son was trying to help me. If I had to describe the months that followed in one word, it would be quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that settles over a calm afternoon or a Sunday morning. No, this was a different kind. A quiet that felt watchful, controlled, as if every sound, every movement, every conversation was being measured before it was allowed to exist. At first I told myself I was imagining it. After all, I was living in someone else's home now. Ethan and Lauren had their own routines, their own rhythms. It was only natural that I would feel slightly out of place, but slightly turned into something else over time. The guest suite behind their house gave me just enough distance to feel separate, but not enough to feel independent. I could see the kitchen lights through the window at night. I could hear the faint murmur of their television. Sometimes laughter drifted through the air, soft and distant. and yet I was rarely part of it. Lauren, in particular, kept her distance in a way that was polite but deliberate. She was never openly rude, never raised her voice, never said anything that could be pointed to as unkind. But warmth was missing. "Good morning, Nicole," she would say, always using my full name. Not Mom, not anything softer, just Nicole. There was something in the way she said it too careful, controlled, like she was maintaining a boundary I hadn't been told about. At dinner, when we had them, she would contribute just enough to be considered present. Small comments, short answers, and then she would disappear again back to her phone, her laptop, her own space. Ethan, on the other hand, began to change in ways that were harder to explain. He wasn't unkind, not directly, but he became efficient. That's the word that comes closest. Everything about the way he interacted with me started to feel structured, planned, as if he were managing a schedule instead of spending time with his mother. "Let's keep your appointments on Tuesdays and Thursdays," he said one morning, sitting across from me with a notebook open. "It'll be easier that way." Easier for who, I wondered. But I nodded. He started organizing my days in small, subtle ways. "Don't worry about grocery shopping, I'll handle it. I've already called and rescheduled your checkup. I think it's better if I go with you to the bank next time." Each statement sounded reasonable on its own, helpful even. But over time they began to stack on top of each other until there was very little left that I handled myself. I noticed it most clearly one afternoon when I went to call an old friend from Savannah. I picked up my phone, dialed her number from memory, and waited. It rang twice before Ethan appeared in the doorway. "Who are you calling?" he asked. The question itself wasn't strange, but the way he asked it was. Too quick, too alert. "Just Linda," I said. "I haven't spoken to her in a while." He hesitated just for a second before stepping into the room. "Maybe we should wait on that," he said. "You've had a lot going on lately. It might be better to rest." "Rest?" I stared at him, the phone still pressed to my ear as it rang unanswered. "I'm just making a call," I said gently. "I know," he replied. "I just don't want you to get overwhelmed." Overwhelmed by a conversation? The thought didn't make sense, but something in his tone made me lower the phone anyway. That was the first time I felt it clearly. Not confusion, not grief, but something sharper, a flicker of unease. Still, I pushed it aside. Because the alternative that my own son was intentionally limiting me felt too heavy to consider. Instead, I started paying closer attention. Small things began to stand out, like the way conversations between Ethan and Lauren would stop the moment I walked into a room. Not pause. Stop. Mid-sentence sometimes, followed by a quick shift in topic that felt rehearsed. "Did you take care of that thing?" Lauren asked one evening as I stepped into the kitchen. Ethan glanced at me, then back at her. "Yeah," he said quickly. "It's handled." They didn't elaborate. And I didn't ask, but the silence that followed lingered longer than it should have. Another time I walked past the living room and saw the two of them sitting close together, speaking in low voices. Lauren was holding a folder one I didn't recognize. When they noticed me, she closed it immediately. "Just bills," she said, with a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Bills. Why did that word feel like a shield? That night I lay awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together something I couldn't quite define. It wasn't one big moment. It was a pattern, a series of small adjustments that taken individually meant nothing but together felt intentional. Even Ethan's language had changed. He started speaking about me differently when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Mom gets confused sometimes, I heard him say once, his voice low, but not low enough. We just have to keep things simple. Confused. The word landed heavily in my chest. Because I didn't feel confused. Not really. Yes, I forgot small things sometimes, names, dates, where I left my glasses. But that happens to everyone. It didn't mean I couldn't think. Didn't mean I couldn't understand. And yet the more he said it, the more I began to question myself. Maybe I had missed something. Maybe I was slipping just a little. That doubt. It crept in quietly, like water seeping into cracks you didn't know were there. And once it was in, it was hard to push out. I started second-guessing simple decisions, double-checking things I had always done without thinking, even asking Ethan for confirmation more often than I used to. Is this right? I would ask, holding up a piece of mail or a prescription bottle. And every time I did, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not concern, not patience. Something else. Something colder. Approval. As if my uncertainty confirmed something he had already decided. Lauren, meanwhile, observed more than she spoke. She watched me in a way that made me feel evaluated. Like she was taking notes on things I didn't even realize I was doing. Once I caught her looking at me for a little too long while I was searching for my keys. When our eyes met, she smiled, but it felt tight, almost satisfied. "I'll help you find them," she said. But I had already found them. They were in my hand. That moment stayed with me, long after the day ended, because for the first time I didn't just feel like I didn't belong. I felt like I was being observed, measured, and slowly, quietly, repositioned into something I didn't recognize. Not as Nicole, not as a mother, but as something else entirely. Something smaller, something easier to control. And the most frightening part, I was starting to believe them. Looking back now, I can see exactly when the ground beneath me began to shift in a way that was no longer subtle. It started, as most things did in that house, with something that sounded reasonable. "Mom, can we talk for a minute?" Ethan stood in the doorway of my suite one late afternoon, his tone careful, almost rehearsed. The sun was setting behind him, casting a long shadow across the floor. I remember noticing how he didn't step inside right away. He stayed just at the edge, as if keeping a distance that hadn't been there before. "Of course," I said, setting aside the book I hadn't really been reading. He came in then, holding a folder. There was always a folder now. He sat across from me, leaning forward slightly, hands clasped together. It was the posture he used when he wanted to appear calm and reasonable. "I didn't want to worry you," he began, "but things have been a little tight lately." My chest tightened instinctively. "Financially?" I asked. He nodded, exhaling as if the admission cost him something. Lauren's hours were cut back a few months ago, and with everything going up, utilities, the mortgage, it's just been a lot to manage. I listened carefully, trying to process what he was saying. "I wish you had told me sooner," I said. "Is there anything I can do to help?" The moment the words left my mouth, I saw it. That flicker again. Quick. Controlled. But there. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about," he said gently. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. There were documents inside, neatly arranged, clipped together. "I think it might be easier if I helped manage one of your accounts for a while," he continued. "Just temporarily, so we can streamline some things. Make sure bills are paid on time. Avoid unnecessary stress for you." Streamline. That word again. I looked down at the papers. "I've always managed my accounts," I said slowly. "I know," he replied quickly, "and you've done an incredible job. This isn't about that, it's just..." Things have been a little overwhelming lately. For all of us. For all of us. He leaned in slightly. And honestly, Mom, you've had a lot on your plate too. With everything after Dad, it's okay to let someone else take the lead for a bit. There it was. Not an accusation, not even a direct suggestion, but something softer, something that sounded like concern. I hesitated. Not because I didn't trust him, but because something inside me, something small but steady, whispered that I should be careful. I don't know, I said quietly. I'd like to think about it. For a moment, the air in the room shifted. It was subtle, but I felt it. Ethan's expression didn't change much, but something behind his eyes tightened. Of course, he said after a beat. Take your time. But his voice had lost a layer of warmth, and I realized perhaps too late that this wasn't a casual suggestion. This was something he expected. Over the next few days, the subject came up again and again. Never aggressively, never in a way that would make me feel pressured outright, but always present. Did you get a chance to look over those papers? It would really help us out, Mom. We're just trying to make things easier for you. Easier? That word was starting to feel heavier than it should have. At the same time, other things began to happen, small, unsettling disruptions that chipped away at my sense of control. One morning I went looking for a bank statement I distinctly remembered placing on the small table by my bed. It wasn't there. I searched the room twice before stepping outside to ask Ethan. Have you seen a statement that came in yesterday? I asked. He frowned slightly as if thinking. I might have moved it, he said. I've been organizing some things for you. Organizing? Where did you put it? I asked. He shrugged lightly. I'll find it later. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. That phrase was becoming very familiar. Later never seemed to come. Another time I reached for my medication only to find the bottle nearly empty. That didn't make sense. I had just refilled it a few days earlier. I walked into the kitchen holding the bottle in my hand. Ethan, did you move my medication? I asked. He glanced at it, then back at me. You've been taking it, right? Yes, but... Then that's probably why it's low, he said, cutting me off gently. I'll call in a refill. I stood there for a moment trying to recall. Had I taken more than I thought? Had I forgotten? The uncertainty settled in before I could stop it. Okay, I said softly. That night I overheard something that stayed with me longer than anything else. I had stepped out onto the small back patio to get some air. The evening was warm, the kind that usually felt comforting. But not that night. Voices drifted from the main house, Ethan and Lauren. They weren't arguing. They were discussing something. Calmly. Carefully. We need to be consistent, Lauren was saying. I know, Ethan replied. I'm working on it. There was a pause. Timing matters, she added. We can't rush it, but we also can't wait too long. My breath caught. Timing. For what? And the documentation. Lauren continued. It's getting there, Ethan said. Just a few more things. Documentation. I stood completely still, afraid that even the sound of my breathing might give me away. Before she changes her mind, Lauren said quietly. The words were soft, but they landed like something heavy dropping inside my chest. Before she changes her mind. I didn't move. I didn't step forward or make my presence known. I just stood there listening to the silence that followed. And for the first time, I didn't try to explain it away. I didn't tell myself I had misunderstood. I didn't convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Because deep down I knew. I didn't know the full picture yet. But I knew this wasn't about helping me. It wasn't about making things easier. It was about something else, something deliberate, something planned. I went back inside quietly, my mind racing. Every small moment over the past weeks, every missing paper, every redirected call, every comment about me being forgetful began to rearrange itself in my memory, not as random events, but as pieces of something I had not wanted to see. Later that night, Ethan came into my room. He knocked lightly before stepping in, his expression calm. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking about the suite." My heart started to beat a little faster. "What about it?" I asked. "There's a plumbing issue," he said. "Nothing major, but it's going to take a couple of days to fix properly." "A couple of days?" "I don't want you dealing with that inconvenience," he continued, "so I thought it might be best if you stayed somewhere else just for a night or two, until everything's sorted out." Somewhere else. The words echoed in my mind. "I can help you pack a few things," he added quickly. "Just the essentials." I looked at him carefully. There was something in his tone again, that same controlled calm, that same quiet insistence. And underneath it, urgency. "Tonight," I asked. "If possible," he said. The plumber's coming early in the morning. It felt too fast, too sudden. But I didn't argue, because a part of me, the part that still wanted to believe in him, was holding on to the idea that this was still my son, that whatever was happening couldn't be what I was starting to fear. "All right," I said quietly. He smiled, relieved. "I'll take care of everything," he said. And as he turned to start gathering my things, I realized something that made my stomach twist. He wasn't asking me what I needed. He was deciding it for me. And for the first time, I felt like I had no control over where my own life was going next. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because of noise or discomfort, but because something inside me refused to settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Lauren's voice again, calm, precise, almost clinical, before she changes her mind. The words looped in my head like a warning I had ignored for too long. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dim light, watching Ethan move around the room. He worked quickly, efficiently, as if packing me for a short trip instead of uprooting me again. Just the essentials, he repeated more than once. He folded my clothes without asking which ones I preferred, chose items from my dresser with a speed that made it clear he had already decided what I would need. When I tried to reach for a sweater, I liked a soft blue one Robert had given me years ago. He gently moved it aside. "You won't need that," he said. I froze for a moment, not because of the sweater, but because of how easily he dismissed something that mattered to me. "I might," I replied softly. "It's going to be warm the next couple of days," he said, not looking at me. "Trust me. Trust me." I let my hand fall back to my lap. That phrase used to bring comfort. Now it felt like a door closing. I watched him continue packing. My jewelry box sat on the dresser, slightly open. I noticed he glanced at it briefly but didn't touch it. That struck me as strange. If this was just a short stay, why leave behind something valuable, something personal? "Should I bring that?" I asked, nodding toward the box. He shook his head quickly. "No, it's safer here. Safer here." Something about that answer felt rehearsed. I didn't argue, but I remembered it. When he finished, the suitcase looked smaller than it should have. Too neat, too light. "Is that everything?" I asked. "For now," he said. "We can always come back for anything else." Again, I stood slowly, taking one last look around the room that had never truly felt like mine. The bed was still made. The small table by the window still held the book I hadn't finished. Everything looked untouched, as if I had never really been there. That thought unsettled me more than I expected. The drive to the motel was quiet. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. The radio played softly in the background, some country song about heartbreak that felt too on the nose to be comforting. I tried to make conversation once. Did the plumber say how long it would take, I asked. A day or two, he replied. Short. Final. I waited for more, but nothing came. The silence stretched between us thick and heavy. I turned my gaze toward the window, watching the familiar streets fade into unfamiliar ones. We drove farther than I expected. Past the parts of town I recognized. Past the grocery store we usually went to. Past the pharmacy. Is it much farther? I asked after a while. Not far, he said. But his grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. I noticed that. I noticed everything now. When we finally pulled into the motel parking lot, my stomach dropped. It wasn't just modest. It was worn. The kind of place where the paint peeled at the edges and the neon sign flickered even though it was still daylight. The parking lot had more empty spaces than occupied ones. A single vending machine stood near the office, humming faintly. This is it, I asked before I could stop myself. Ethan turned off the engine. It's just for a night or two, he said quickly. They had availability on short notice. I looked at the building again, at the narrow walkway, at the faded curtains behind the windows, at the door that led to the small office. Something inside me shifted, not fully into understanding, but closer. This doesn't seem like somewhere you would choose, I said carefully. He opened his door. It's temporary, Mom. Temporary. He came around to my side and opened my door before I could respond. I stepped out slowly, the warm air pressing against my skin. The smell hit me first. Old carpet, stale smoke, something faintly sour. I swallowed hard. Ethan grabbed my suitcase and started toward the office without waiting to see if I was following. I did, because I didn't know what else to do. Inside the office was small and dimly lit. A counter separated us from the clerk behind it. She was young, late 20s, maybe her dark hair pulled back neatly, her posture straight but relaxed. She looked up as we entered. Checking in, she asked. Ethan nodded quickly. Yes, reservation under West. She typed something into the computer, her fingers moving with practiced ease. Just one night, she confirmed. One night. The words echoed in my mind. Yes, Ethan said. Too fast. Too certain. I felt something cold settle in my chest. The clerk glanced at the screen, then reached for a key card. I'll just need ID. She stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes shifted. From Ethan to me. And then they stayed there. Something in her expression changed. Not confusion, not politeness, recognition. Her brow furrowed slightly, her lips parting as if she were about to say something but wasn't sure yet. I felt my breath catch. Had I met her before? I searched her face, trying to place her. Nothing came. Ethan shifted beside me. Is there a problem? He asked, his voice tighter than before. The clerk didn't answer right away. She was still looking at me, studying me, as if trying to confirm something she wasn't quite ready to believe. And then, "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice no longer routine. She leaned forward just slightly, her eyes locked onto mine. And when she spoke again, it wasn't a question. It was my name. Nicole? West. Everything in the room seemed to stop. The hum of the vending machine outside, the faint buzz of the overhead lights. Even the air felt still. I stared at her, my mind scrambling. "Yes," I said slowly. "Do I know you? Know you?" Before she could answer, I felt Ethan move beside me. Not forward, not closer. Back. Just a step. But enough. Enough for me to notice. Enough for something deep in my chest to tighten. The clerk's gaze flickered briefly toward him. And in that split second, I saw it. She noticed too. She noticed the distance, the hesitation, the way he was already preparing to leave. When her eyes returned to mine, they held something new, something stronger than recognition. Concern. And suddenly, for the first time since we walked into that motel, I didn't feel alone. For a moment, none of us spoke. The air inside that small motel office felt tight, like it had been pulled too thin. I could hear my own breathing shallow and uneven, and the faint clicking of the old computer behind the counter as it idled. The young woman, Tasha, though I didn't know her name yet, didn't look away from me. "Nicole West." She repeated softer this time, as if testing the sound of it. "Yes," I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry I don't." "You used to volunteer," she said suddenly, "at a literacy program in Savannah, at the church on East Broad Street." Something inside me stirred, a memory faint and distant like a photograph left too long in the sun. I hesitated. "Yes, I did. Many years ago." Her eyes widened just a little, and I saw something like relief flicker across her face. "I thought so," she said. "I knew it was you." Beside me, Ethan shifted his weight. "That's nice," he said, forcing a small, tight smile. "But we're actually in a bit of a hurry." His tone had changed. Gone was the calm, controlled patience he had used at home. Now there was something else beneath it. Urgency. Almost anxiety. Tasha's attention moved to him just for a second. She studied his face, his posture, the way his hand hovered near the edge of the counter as if he were ready to pull away at any moment. Then she looked back at me, and this time her voice lowered. "Are you staying here alone?" she asked. The question caught me off guard. Well, just for a night or two," I said, glancing at Ethan. "My son is helping me while her room is being fixed." Ethan cut in quickly. "Plumbing issue. Nothing serious." He spoke smoothly, almost too smoothly. Tasha nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. "Of course," she said. "I just need to complete the check-in process." She reached for a form, her movements deliberate now. "Can I see your ID, ma'am?" I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against familiar items. My wallet, a handkerchief, a small photo of Robert I kept tucked in the side pocket. I handed over my ID. Tasha took it, but instead of simply glancing at it, she studied it carefully. Then she looked back at me. Her expression softened. "Do you remember a girl named Tasha?" she asked quietly. The name lingered in the air, Tasha. I searched my memory again more carefully this time. Faces from years ago began to surface, children and teenagers who had come through the literacy program. Some shy, some angry, some just trying to find a place to belong. And then, a girl sitting at the far end of a long table. Dark hair pulled back, eyes that avoided contact at first, but always watching, always listening. "You used to come after school?" I said slowly, the memory sharpening with each word. "You stayed late sometimes. You liked the reading corner by the window." Her breath caught. "Yes," she said. "And your mother?" I hesitated, trying to recall. She was sick, wasn't she? Tasha nodded, her eyes glistening slightly. She passed away that year, she said. I didn't have anywhere to go after that. Not really. The room felt smaller somehow. Closer, I remember I said softly. You were so quiet at first, but then you started reading out loud. You had a beautiful voice. A small emotional smile touched her lips. You helped me apply for that scholarship, she said, and you spoke to someone about getting me into a safe housing program. You probably don't even remember how much you did. I swallowed hard, because she was right. I hadn't remembered. Not until now. You changed everything for me, she added, her voice steady but full. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. The weight of her words settled over me in a way I wasn't prepared for. All those years ago, I had simply done what felt right, what felt necessary. I hadn't expected anything in return. I certainly hadn't expected this. Before I could respond, Ethan cleared his throat. That's a really touching story, he said, his tone polite but strained. But like I said, we're in a bit of a hurry. He reached for the key card on the counter. Tasha didn't move it toward him. Instead, she placed her hand lightly over it. Just one more thing, she said calmly. Ethan's jaw tightened. What is it? He asked. I'll need a card for the room, she replied. We don't typically accept cash-only stays without a backup. My heart skipped. Cash only. I looked at Ethan. He didn't meet my eyes. I already paid, he said. That shouldn't be an issue. It's just policy, Tasha said evenly, especially for single-night stays. Single night. There it was again, a quiet confirmation of something I hadn't wanted to fully face. Ethan exhaled sharply. I don't have time for this, he said. Just give us the key. We'll sort out anything else later. Tasha didn't budge. I'm sorry, she said. I just need to make sure everything is properly documented. There was a pause. A long one. And in that silence, something shifted. Ethan's composure cracked just slightly, but enough. I said we're in a hurry. He snapped, his voice low but edged now. The sound startled me, not because he had raised his voice, but because of how quickly it happened, how easily. Tasha didn't react the way I expected. She didn't flinch. She didn't back down. Instead, she looked at me again, directly. Ma'am, she said gently, are you comfortable staying here tonight? The question landed like something solid, heavy, impossible to ignore. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came, because for the first time, I wasn't sure what the truth was. Was I comfortable? Was I safe? Was this really temporary, or was I standing at the edge of something I didn't fully understand yet? I glanced at Ethan. He was watching me now, not with concern, not with patience, but with expectation. As if my answer mattered, but only if it aligned with his, and suddenly I felt something rise inside me. Not fear, not confusion, but something clearer, something sharper. A quiet, steady awareness that had been building for weeks, months, even finally pushing its way to the surface. I began slowly. My voice trembled at first, but I steadied it. I don't know. The words hung in the air. Honest. Uncertain. Real. Tasha nodded as if that answer told her everything she needed to know. Ethan, on the other hand, went completely still, and in that stillness, I realized something that made my chest tighten. He hadn't expected me to say that. Not at all. The moment I said I don't know, something changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that was impossible to take back. Ethan's expression didn't explode into anger or panic. That would have been easier to understand. Instead, it hardened quietly, almost imperceptibly. His jaw tightened, and for the first time I saw something in his eyes that I had never seen directed at me before. Calculation. Tasha saw it too. I could tell by the way her posture shifted just slightly straighter, more alert. The warmth in her face didn't disappear, but it sharpened into something protective. "That's okay," she said gently. Her voice directed at me, but steady enough for Ethan to hear every word. "We'll take this one step at a time." That word settled into me differently this time. Not like Ethan's version of we, which had always carried an unspoken expectation. This one felt shared, supportive. Ethan let out a controlled breath, running a hand through his hair. "Mom," he said, his tone shifting again, softer now, almost pleading. "You're just tired. It's been a long day. Let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be." Tired. The word felt familiar, convenient. "I'm not making it complicated," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended, but steadier than I expected. "I just need a moment." His lips pressed into a thin line. "You've had moments," he said. "We've been talking about this all day." That wasn't true. We hadn't talked. He had told me what was happening. There was a difference. Tasha moved then, stepping slightly to the side of the counter, creating a subtle barrier between us and the door. "I'm just going to finish up a few things here," she said calmly. "It'll only take a minute." Ethan's eyes flicked toward the door behind her, then back to me, then to the clock on the wall. He was measuring something. Time, maybe. Or opportunity. "Fine," he said finally, though there was tension in every letter. "Make it quick." Tasha gave a small nod, then leaned slightly closer to me, her voice lowering just enough that it felt private without being secretive. "Can I ask you something?" she said. I nodded. "Do you have your phone with you?" I blinked, surprised by the question. "Yes," I said, reaching into my purse to confirm. "It's right here." "Good," she said softly. "Keep it with you." Something in her tone made my fingers tighten around it instinctively. Ethan shifted again. "Is there a reason we're having a private conversation?" he asked, his voice edged with irritation. Tasha straightened, meeting his gaze evenly. "Just making sure everything is in order," she said. "Like I mentioned, policy." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked at me again. And this time, there was something new in his expression. Not just expectation. Pressure. "Mom," he said more firmly now. "Let's just get you settled. I'll go grab your medication and be right back. You don't need to worry about any of this." Medication. The word echoed in my mind. I glanced down at my purse again, then back at him. "You didn't bring it?" I asked. He hesitated. "Just for a second. I thought it would be easier to pick it up fresh," he said. Easier. Everything was always easier in his version of events. But suddenly, that word didn't reassure me. It unsettled me. Tasha spoke again before I could respond. "Actually," she said, her tone casual but deliberate. "We usually recommend guests keep their personal medications with them, especially for short stays." Ethan's jaw tightened again. "I said, I'll get it," he replied, sharper this time. "And I'm just saying it's safer to have it on hand," Tasha said calmly. The tension between them was no longer subtle. It stretched across the room, thin and fragile, like something that could snap at any moment. I stood there caught between them, my thoughts racing faster than I could organize them. Medication. Missing bank statements. Redirected calls, conversations that stopped when I entered a room, Lauren's voice in the night, before she changes her mind. And now, a motel room for one night, cash payment. No medication. No real explanation. The pieces didn't just feel disconnected anymore. They felt aligned. Too aligned. "I think I'd like to sit down for a minute," I said suddenly. Both of them turned to me. "There's a chair right over there," Tasha said quickly, gesturing to a small seating area near the wall. I walked toward it slowly, my legs feeling heavier than they should. As I sat down, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge until now. I didn't feel safe. Not completely. Not with everything. Not with him. The thought hit me like a quiet shock. Because it wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just clear. Ethan followed me halfway across the room, stopping a few feet away. "You're overthinking this," he said, lowering his voice. "It's just a place to stay for the night. I'll be back in an hour tops." An hour. The number felt arbitrary, uncertain. "Will you?" I asked before I could stop myself. The question hung there, simple, but heavy. Ethan blinked. "What does that mean?" he asked. I held his gaze. "I mean, will you come back?" For a split second, something flickered across his face. Not anger, not offense, but something closer to being caught off guard. "Of course I will," he said quickly. "Why wouldn't I?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't trust my voice. Tasha stepped in again, her tone still calm but firmer now. "Sir, I'm going to need a valid card on file before I can complete the check-in." Ethan exhaled sharply. "I already told you I understand," she interrupted gently, "but I can't finalize the room without it." There it was again. A delay. Intentional. Measured. Ethan's patience was thinning. I could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, in the way his fingers tapped against his leg. He looked at me one more time, and this time there was no softness left. "Mom," he said, his voice low and controlled. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The words landed differently now, not as concern, not as frustration, but as something else entirely. Blame. And in that moment, something inside me shifted again. Not into fear, not into confusion, but into clarity, because I realized something that I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This wasn't about helping me. It wasn't about making things easier. And it certainly wasn't about one night. It was about control. And for the first time since this all began, I stopped trying to make excuses for him. Clarity doesn't arrive like a storm. It doesn't crash through the door and announce itself with noise and chaos. It comes quietly, like a light turning on in a room you didn't realize had gone dark. And once it's there, you can't unsee what's been in front of you all along. I sat in that stiff motel chair, my hands resting in my lap, my purse still clutched tightly against me. Across the room, Ethan stood near the counter, his patience wearing thin, his voice low but edged every time he spoke to Tasha. But I wasn't really listening to him anymore. Not the way I used to. Instead, I was listening to something else. To the pattern. To the memory of every moment that had felt slightly off but not enough to question. Until now. Tasha moved behind the counter with deliberate calm, her fingers tapping lightly against the keyboard as she pretended to review the reservation again. But I could tell she wasn't just processing a check-in. She was buying time. And she was doing it for me. "Mr. West," she said, after a moment, her tone steady, "I just need to verify a few details on the reservation." Ethan let out a slow breath, clearly irritated. What now? He muttered. You booked this room earlier today, she continued, glancing at the screen. Paid in cash. 1 night stay. There it was again. 1 night. Not 2. Not a couple of days. 1, yes, Ethan said sharply. Like I said, it's temporary. Tasha nodded slowly. And you mentioned that your mother might need assistance? She added carefully. The word hung in the air. Assistance. Ethan didn't answer right away. I felt my chest tighten. That's just a precaution, he said finally. She's been a little forgetful lately. Forgetful. The word echoed louder now, but this time something inside me pushed back. Because I remembered. I remembered the stove I never left on, the medication that disappeared, the statements that went missing, the conversations that stopped when I walked into the room. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was something else. Tasha glanced at me again, not with pity, not with doubt, but with understanding. Of course, she said quietly. We just like to make sure our guests are comfortable and safe. Safe. That word landed differently now, because for the first time, I was starting to question whether I had been. Tasha stepped away from the counter, briefly picking up a clipboard from a side shelf. As she turned back, she paused beside my chair just for a second. Just long enough. Her voice dropped soft and steady. He told us you might be confused, she said under her breath. The words hit me like a physical force. I felt my stomach drop. My fingers tightened around my purse. I'm not, I whispered. I know, she replied gently. And that simple response, those 2 words, did something I hadn't realized I needed. They grounded me. Because for weeks, maybe longer, I had been questioning myself, wondering if I was slipping, if I was losing something I couldn't name. But in that moment, I felt clear, present, certain. Tasha straightened and returned to the counter as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I looked up at Ethan, really looked at him, at the way his eyes kept flicking toward the door, at the way his posture leaned slightly away from me, at the way he seemed more focused on leaving than staying. You only booked 1 night, I said quietly. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Ethan froze. Just for a second. Then he forced a small laugh. It's easier to extend if we need to, he said. You don't want to overpay. Overpay. I held his gaze. You said a couple of days. I said we'd see how long it takes. He replied quickly, You're misremembering. There it was. The shift. The blame. But this time, it didn't land the same way, because I wasn't unsure anymore. I remember what you said, I replied, my voice steady. His expression tightened. For a moment, neither of us spoke, and in that silence, something fragile between us cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. Tasha cleared her throat, softly breaking the tension. I'm just going to finish up here, she said, her tone neutral. Should only be another minute. Ethan nodded stiffly, but I could tell he was losing control of the situation. Not outwardly, not in a way that would draw attention, but internally. The plan, whatever it had been, was no longer moving the way he expected. I opened my purse slowly, my hands steady now despite the storm inside me. I checked for my medication again. Still not there. Where is it? I asked, looking up at him. Ethan frowned. What? My medication. I said, the one I take every morning. Where is it? I told you I'll pick it up. You packed my things. I interrupted, my voice firmer than before. You said you brought the essentials. He hesitated. Just long enough. And that was all I needed. I didn't think you'd need it for 1 night, he said finally. 1 night. The truth slipped out so easily, so casually, as if it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than anything, because it confirmed what I had been too afraid to fully accept. This wasn't about taking care of me. This wasn't about convenience. This was about leaving me here, unprepared, dependent, alone. I felt something rise inside me then. Not panic, not fear. Something steadier, something stronger. "No," I said quietly. The word surprised even me. Ethan blinked. "What do you mean I mean no?" I repeated, lifting my head slightly. "I'm not staying here like this." The room went still again. Tasha's fingers paused on the keyboard. Ethan stared at me. "You're tired," he said, his voice low, controlled. "You're not thinking clearly." There it was again. The narrative. The one he had been building piece by piece. But this time, I rejected it. "I am thinking clearly," I said, and for the first time since all of this began, I believed it. Tasha stepped forward, then her presence quiet but firm. "Ma'am," she said gently, "if you're not comfortable staying, we can figure out another option." Another option. The words felt like a door opening. Ethan turned to her sharply. "There is no other option," he said. But his voice lacked the certainty it once had. Because he knew that something had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. I stood slowly, my legs steadier than I expected. "I'm not staying here," I said again. Not louder, not more forceful. Just certain. Ethan's face changed then. Not into anger, not fully, but into something colder. Something that no longer tried to hide itself behind concern. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. I looked at him, at the man I had raised, at the man I thought I knew, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. "No," I said softly. "I think I've already made that mistake." For a few seconds after I said it, no one moved. It was as if the room itself was waiting to see what would happen next, whether I would take the words back, soften them, or retreat into the uncertainty I had been living in for so long. But I didn't, because something inside me had settled into place. Not perfectly, not without fear, but firmly enough that I knew I couldn't step backward again. Ethan stared at me, his expression unreadable at first. Then slowly something tightened in his jaw. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice controlled. "This isn't necessary." Necessary. The word almost made me laugh. Almost. "What's not necessary?" I asked. This he said, gesturing vaguely between us. "The resistance, the confusion. You're making this harder than it needs to be." Confusion. There it was again, but this time I didn't let it sink in. "I'm not confused," I said. He exhaled slowly, as if dealing with a difficult situation he had anticipated. "Yes," he replied, "you are. And that's okay. That's exactly why I'm trying to help you. Help." I felt something cold settle in my chest, because I finally understood what his version of help looked like. It looked like silence. It looked like control. It looked like removing choices and calling it care. Behind the counter, Tasha spoke again, her tone calm but carrying a quiet authority now. "Sir, I'm going to need to complete the check-in or cancel the reservation," she said. "I can't hold the room indefinitely." Ethan didn't look at her. He was still watching me, measuring, calculating. "Cancel it," he said suddenly. The words came faster than I expected. Sharper. Final. My breath caught. Cancel it. For a split second, something inside me faltered, because that wasn't part of the version I had been bracing for. He wasn't arguing to make me stay. He wasn't insisting. He was pulling away. If she doesn't want the room, then fine, he added, his voice cooling further. We'll figure something else out. Something else. The phrase felt empty, vague, and suddenly dangerous, because I didn't know what something else meant, and neither, I realized, did he, at least not in a way that included me. Tasha didn't move immediately. She studied him for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. All right, she said. I'll go ahead and cancel it. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, the soft clicking filling the silence. I watched Ethan carefully. He didn't seem relieved. If anything, he seemed frustrated, as if the situation had slipped outside of his control in a way he hadn't anticipated. Come on, he said to me, his tone clipped. Let's go. He turned toward the door without waiting. For a moment, I stayed where I was, because something didn't feel right. Not just the motel, not just the plan, but this sudden shift, this quick retreat. Where are we going? I asked. He stopped, his hand already on the door. Back to the house, he said without turning around. The answer came too quickly, too easily, and something inside me resisted it. No, I said quietly. He turned then, slowly. What do you mean, no? He asked. I mean... I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I don't think I should go back there. Not tonight. The air between us changed again. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. That doesn't make any sense, he said. Your room needs repairs. That's why we came here in the first place. I held his gaze. Then we can find somewhere else, I said. Together. The last word lingered. Deliberate. Testing. He didn't respond right away. And in that pause, I saw it. The flicker of hesitation. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because he hadn't planned for this version of me. The version that questioned, that paused, that didn't follow. I don't have time to go searching for another place, he said finally. I have things to take care of. Things. Always things. Unspecified. Unexplained. I thought you were helping me, I replied. The words were quiet, but they landed. His expression tightened again. I am helping you, he said more sharply now. But you have to meet me halfway. Halfway! The word echoed in my mind, because suddenly I realized something that felt both obvious and devastating. There had never been a halfway. Not really. There had only been his direction, his decisions, his version of what was best, and me adjusting to it. Until now. Tasha stepped out from behind the counter, then her presence calm but unmistakably supportive. Ma'am, she said gently, if you'd like, you can sit here for a bit. There's no rush. Ethan turned to her, irritation flashing across his face. This doesn't concern you, he said. Tasha didn't flinch. It concerns me if a guest doesn't feel safe, she replied evenly. Safe. The words settled heavily between us. Ethan looked back at me, and for the first time there was no attempt to soften his expression. No performance. No careful tone. Just something colder. More direct. You're overreacting, he said. I felt a strange calm wash over me, because the moment he said that, I knew I wasn't. I don't think I am, I replied. The silence that followed stretched longer than any before it. Then Ethan let out a short, sharp breath. Fine, he said. Stay here if you want. but I'm not going to stand around all night arguing about it." The words hit harder than I expected, because they weren't angry. They were dismissive, as if I had already been set aside. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his car keys, and headed for the door again. This time he didn't hesitate, didn't look back. "Ethan," I said, my voice catching before I could stop it. He paused, but he didn't turn around. For a moment I considered saying something else, something that might bring him back, something softer, something that would restore what we had lost. But the words didn't come, because I realized something in that moment. If I had to shrink myself to keep him from leaving, then he had already left. The door opened, closed, and just like that, he was gone. The silence that followed felt different, not empty, not heavy, but clear. I stood there for a moment staring at the door, waiting for something, for him to come back, for this to feel like a misunderstanding, for the version of my son I knew to walk back through that door and explain everything. But nothing happened. The parking lot outside remained still. The faint hum of the vending machine returned, and the truth settled quietly into place. He had left me, not by accident, not out of frustration, but by choice. "Nicole," Tasha said softly from beside me. I turned toward her slowly, and for the first time since all of this began, I let myself feel it. The weight, the loss, the realization. "I think he was going to leave me here," I said. The words came out steadier than I expected, not as a question, not as confusion, but as a fact. Tasha didn't hesitate. "I think so too," she said gently. And somehow, hearing it out loud didn't break me. It grounded me, because now I knew. And once you know, you can finally decide what comes next. For a long moment after Ethan walked out, I didn't move. Not because I couldn't, but because I needed to understand what had just happened in a way my heart could accept. The door had closed behind him so quietly. No slammed exit. No shouting. No final argument. Just gone. And somehow that silence made it harder, because it left no room for denial. "He'll come back," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. Tasha didn't answer right away. She stepped closer. Her presence calm, steady, not intrusive, but there. "Maybe," she said gently, "but right now we need to focus on you. Me." The word felt unfamiliar in that moment. For so long, everything had been about adjusting to Ethan, to Lauren, to what they needed, what they decided, what they believed was best. I hadn't asked myself what I needed in a long time. "I don't even know where to start," I admitted quietly. Tasha nodded as if she had been expecting that. "That's okay," she said. "We can take this one step at a time." She gestured toward the small seating area again. "Why don't you sit for a moment? I'll grab you some water." I nodded, my legs suddenly feeling heavier than before. As I sat down, I placed my purse carefully on my lap, my fingers still wrapped around it like it was the only thing anchoring me. The room felt different now. Not threatening, not uncertain, but still unfamiliar. Tasha returned a moment later with a plastic bottle of water and handed it to me. "Here," she said softly. "Thank you," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. She didn't rush me, didn't press. She simply waited, giving me space to breathe. After a few sips of water, I realized something. My hands weren't shaking anymore. That surprised me, because I thought I would feel panic, fear, something overwhelming. But instead, I felt clear. Tired, yes. Hurt deeply, but clear. Tasha, I said, testing her name now that I knew it. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you said, he told you I might be confused. She nodded slightly. What exactly did he say? Tasha hesitated, not out of reluctance, but out of care, as if she was choosing her words carefully. He didn't say it directly, she explained, but when he booked the room, he mentioned that you might need extra attention, that you could be disoriented, that staff should keep an eye on you. Disoriented. The word landed heavily, but the way he said it. She continued, it didn't feel like concern. It felt like preparation. Preparation. I closed my eyes briefly because that word fit. It fit everything. The missing documents, the conversations, the quiet comments about my memory. It wasn't random. It was being built, piece by piece. He wanted you to believe that I said slowly. Tasha nodded. I think so. A long silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just full. Full of realization. I found something in my suitcase earlier, I said, after a moment, my voice quieter now. Tasha leaned in slightly. What kind of something? I reached down, unzipping the front pocket of the suitcase Ethan had packed. My fingers moved carefully, deliberately, because I hadn't looked at it closely before. Not really, but now I needed to. After a few seconds, I found it. A thin folder. Plain. Unmarked. I pulled it out slowly, placing it on my lap. I don't think he meant to leave this, I said. Tasha's eyes focused on it immediately. Do you mind if I... Please, I said, opening it. Inside were papers, copies, printed documents with highlighted sections and handwritten notes in the margins. I recognized some of the information instantly. My account numbers, addresses, dates. But then, other things. Legal terms, phrases I didn't fully understand at first glance. Guardianship. I read quietly. My breath caught. Petition for evaluation. Tasha's expression changed. Not into panic, but into certainty. This isn't normal, she said. No, I whispered. It isn't. I flipped through the pages, my hands steady now despite what I was seeing. There were notes, detailed ones, observations, occasional forgetfulness, needs assistance with daily tasks, potential cognitive decline, recommend documentation. I stared at the words, at the version of myself they described. A version I didn't recognize. This is me, I said softly. This is how they've been describing me. Tasha sat down beside me. Nicole, she said carefully, this looks like they were preparing to file something. To take control, I finished. The words didn't feel dramatic. They felt accurate. Over your finances. Maybe more, she added. I leaned back in the chair, the weight of it settling over me. Not crushing, not overwhelming, just heavy. They were building a case, I said. That's why everything felt so controlled, so managed. Tasha nodded slowly. And bringing you here, she said. It would have helped prove it I finished. If I stayed. Alone. Without medication. Confused. The realization was sharp now. Clear. Complete. I wasn't being helped. I was being positioned. Carefully. Strategically. For something I hadn't agreed to. For something I hadn't even been told about. I closed the folder gently, because I didn't need to read more. I understood enough. What do I do now? I asked. It wasn't a helpless question. It was a practical one. Tasha didn't answer immediately. Instead, she thought for a moment. Then she said, "Do you have a lawyer? Someone you trust?" The name came to me almost instantly. "Mark Henderson," I said. "He handled my husband's estate." "Can you call him?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, I think so." My fingers tightened around my phone again, this time not out of fear, but purpose. "Do it," Tasha said gently. "Tell him everything." I looked at her, really looked at her, at the young woman who had recognized me when I didn't even recognize myself anymore, at the one person in this moment who had chosen to stand beside me without hesitation. "You didn't have to help me," I said quietly. Her expression softened. "You helped me once," she said. "You just don't remember how much it meant." I swallowed hard, because now I was starting to understand, and for the first time since Ethan drove me to that motel, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt supported. I took a breath, unlocked my phone, and dialed a number I hadn't used in over a year, because if there was one thing I knew now, it was that I wasn't going to let this continue. Not quietly, not passively, not anymore. The phone rang longer than I expected. Each second stretched not with panic, but with anticipation. I sat there, the folder still resting on my lap, Tasha beside me, her presence steady but silent. When the call finally connected, a familiar voice answered. "Henderson and Cole Law Offices. This is Rebecca speaking. How may I direct your call?" For a moment, I hesitated. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because saying it out loud would make everything real in a way I couldn't take back. "This is Nicole West," I said. "I'd like to speak with Mark Henderson if he's available." There was a brief pause on the line. "Mrs. West," Rebecca replied, her tone softening slightly. "One moment, please." I waited, my fingers tightening slightly around the phone. Then Nicole. The voice was older, steady, and unmistakably familiar. "Mark?" I said, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "It's been a while," he said gently. "Are you all right?" That question. Simple. Direct. It nearly broke me, because for the first time in a long time, someone was asking me that without expectation, without assumption. "I don't think I am," I admitted quietly. The honesty surprised even me. There was a pause on the other end. Then his voice shifted, subtle but immediate, professional, focused. "Tell me what's going on," he said. So I did. Not all at once. Not perfectly, but clearly. I told him about Ethan, about moving to Macon, about the changes, the small ones at first, the missing documents, the redirected calls, the comments about forgetfulness, the pressure to sign things, the conversation I overheard, and finally, the motel, the one-night booking, the missing medication, the folder. I didn't rush. I didn't dramatize. I just told the truth. When I finished, there was silence on the line again. But this time it wasn't uncertainty. It was consideration. Nicole Mark said carefully, "I need you to listen to me very closely." I straightened slightly in my chair. "Okay. What you're describing," he continued, "is consistent with someone preparing to petition for legal guardianship or conservatorship." The words landed heavily. Even though I had already begun to understand them, they would need documentation, he added. Evidence of cognitive decline, statements, behavioral observations. I glanced down at the folder in my lap. "They have that," I said. I believe you, he replied. His certainty was immediate, unquestioning, and that alone steadied me. Have you signed anything recently? He asked. No, I said quickly. They asked me to, but I didn't. Good, he said firmly. That's very good. I exhaled slowly, because for the first time it felt like something had gone right. Where are you right now? He asked. At a motel, I said. In Macon. But I haven't checked in. Are you alone? I glanced at Tasha. No, I said. Someone here is helping me. Good, he repeated. Stay there for now. Do not go back to your son's house tonight. The clarity in his voice left no room for hesitation. I won't, I said. I'm going to need you to do a few things, he continued. First, keep that folder safe. Do not let anyone else access it. I understand. Second, I want you to come to my office as soon as possible. Tomorrow morning if you can. I can, I said. I'll clear my schedule, he replied. We'll go through everything together. There was a brief pause. Then his voice softened slightly. Nicole, I'm very glad you called. The words hit deeper than I expected, because they carried something I hadn't felt in a long time. Support. I almost didn't, I admitted. I'm glad you did, he said again. We ended the call shortly after, but the moment the line went quiet, I felt different. Not fixed, not healed, but anchored. Because now I had something I hadn't had before. Clarity, direction, and someone in my corner who understood what was happening. I lowered the phone slowly, my gaze drifting back to the folder. Tasha watched me carefully. What did he say? She asked. I took a breath. He confirmed it, I said. They were preparing to take control of my finances. Maybe more. Her expression tightened slightly. I thought so, she said. He told me not to go back, I added, and to meet him tomorrow. That's good, she said quickly. That's really good. I nodded. Yes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The room felt quieter now, but not in the same way as before. This quiet wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It felt steady, like the calm after something has finally been named. I need to check something, I said after a moment. I opened my purse again, pulling out my wallet. Inside were my cards, my ID. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but when I reached for my phone again and opened my email, something caught my attention. Notifications. Multiple ones. From my bank. From the past few weeks. Unread. My stomach tightened. I opened one, then another. Then another. Each one told a similar story. Changes to account settings, updates to contact preferences, security alerts that had been marked as reviewed. Reviewed. But not by me. They've been changing things, I said quietly. Tasha leaned closer. What kind of things access, I said. Notifications. Contact information. I scrolled further. And, look at this. I turned the phone slightly so she could see. A note. Small. Almost easy to miss. Authorized secondary contact Ethan West. I stared at it. Because I hadn't added that. Not knowingly. I never approved this, I said. Tasha's expression hardened slightly. Can you remove it? I think so. I said, my fingers already moving. But as I tried, a prompt appeared. Verification required. A code sent to a number. Not mine. Ethan's. My breath caught. He set it up so I can't change it without him, I said. The realization was sharp. deliberate, calculated. Tasha exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said. "That's important information. Your lawyer will know what to do." I nodded, but inside, something shifted again. Not into fear, not into panic, but into something stronger. Because now I understood the full picture. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't stress. This wasn't desperation. This was a plan, carefully built, step by step, and I had walked right into it. Until now. I locked my phone and placed it back in my purse. Then I looked up. At Tasha, at the small motel office, at the place I never should have been. And yet, the place that had changed everything. "I think they underestimated me," I said quietly. Tasha's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "I think they did," she replied. And for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like someone who had finally seen the truth and was ready to do something about it. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind refused to slow down now that it finally understood what had been happening. Tasha had helped me secure a small room at the motel under my own name, properly documented with my ID, and everything handled correctly. It wasn't comfortable, and it certainly wasn't where I had imagined myself at this stage of life, but it was mine. That mattered more than anything. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, the folder spread out beside me, reading through each page more carefully than before. Every note, every highlight, every line written about me as if I were someone else. Occasional confusion, increasing dependence, needs assistance with decision-making. The words weren't just observations. They were building blocks, a narrative, one that if presented the right way could make it seem as though I was no longer capable of managing my own life. And what frightened me most wasn't how detailed it was. It was how believable it could have been if I hadn't seen the truth in time. By the time morning came, I was exhausted. But I was also ready. Tasha drove me to Mark Henderson's office just after 9. "I can wait for you," she offered as we pulled into the parking lot. I looked at her, at the quiet kindness that had carried me through the past 12 hours. "You've already done more than enough," I said gently. She shook her head. "I want to," she replied simply. There was no pressure in it, no obligation, just choice. And that more than anything made me trust her. "All right," I said with a small nod. Mark's office looked exactly the same as I remembered, neat, orderly, quiet in a way that felt intentional rather than empty. When I stepped inside, Rebecca greeted me immediately. "Mrs. West," she said warmly, "Mr. Henderson is ready for you." "No waiting, no delay." That alone told me how seriously he was taking this. Mark stood as I entered his office. "Nicole," he said, crossing the room quickly. There was no hesitation in his expression. No doubt. Just concern and something else. Respect. "Thank you for seeing me," I said. "Of course," he replied. "Sit down. We didn't waste time." We didn't. I placed the folder on his desk, sliding it toward him. "This is what I found," I said. He opened it carefully, his eyes scanning each page with the practiced focus of someone who had seen more than enough of situations like this. As he read, his expression shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. His jaw tightened slightly, his brow furrowed, and when he reached the notes, the observations about my supposed decline, he exhaled slowly. "This is thorough," he said. "Too thorough," I asked. He looked up at me. "Deliberate," he corrected. The word felt accurate, because that's exactly what it had been. "So what does it mean?" I asked. He leaned back slightly in his chair, folding his hands together.
It means they were preparing to petition for guardianship, he said. And based on what I'm seeing here, they were trying to build a case that you are no longer capable of managing your own affairs.
I nodded.
I thought so. What concerns me, he continued, is the level of documentation. This isn't something someone throws together quickly. This takes time.
Planning. The word echoed again. How far could they have gone? I asked.
That depends, he said. If they had enough documentation, they could file a petition. That would trigger an evaluation process, medical assessments, possibly a court hearing.
And if they succeeded, his expression didn't soften. If they succeeded, he said carefully, they could gain legal control over your finances, your decisions, potentially even where you live. The weight of that settled over me slowly, because it wasn't just about money. It was about autonomy, about identity, about losing the right to make decisions for myself. They almost had it, I said quietly. Mark didn't disagree. But they didn't, he replied. And that matters. I nodded slowly.
Yes,
he leaned forward slightly.
Now we need to make sure it stays that way.
The shift in his tone was clear. This was no longer just explanation. This was strategy.
I've already seen some changes to my accounts, I said. Access points, notifications.
He nodded.
That's consistent, he said. We'll need to secure everything immediately.
He began making notes. First, we'll revoke any unauthorized access. Second, we'll notify your bank formally that there may have been attempted interference. Third, we'll prepare documentation of your current capacity, medical, financial, legal. I listened carefully, absorbing each step.
And Ethan, I asked.
Mark paused. Then he looked at me directly.
That depends on what you want,
he said. The question caught me off guard, because for so long, everything had been about what Ethan wanted, what Ethan decided, what Ethan believed was best. I don't want him to control anything I said. My voice didn't waver.
Not this time.
Mark nodded.
Then we make that clear,
he said. There was a knock on the door before I could respond. Rebecca stepped in slightly.
Mr. Henderson,
she said, there's someone here asking for Mrs. West. My heart skipped.
Who? Mark asked.
Ethan West, she replied. The room went still. I felt it immediately. That shift, that tension. He had come. Of course he had. Mark looked at me.
Do you want to see him?
He asked. The question felt heavier than anything else that morning, because this wasn't just about legal strategy. This was about something deeper, something personal, something painful. I took a breath, then another, and in that moment I realized something important. I wasn't afraid of him. Not anymore.
Yes,
I said. Mark nodded once.
All right, he said. But he doesn't come in here alone.
A few moments later, the door opened again, and Ethan stepped inside. He looked different. Not disheveled, not frantic, but unsettled. His eyes found mine immediately. Mom, he said. The word sounded the same, but it felt different, because now I knew what stood behind it, and I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. For a moment, Ethan just stood there, not speaking, not moving, as if he were trying to decide which version of himself to bring into the room. The concerned son, the patient caretaker, or the man who had walked away from me in a motel parking lot without looking back.
Mom,
he said again, taking a cautious step forward.
I've been trying to reach you.
His voice was softer now, measured. carefully controlled. I noticed that. I noticed everything now. I know, I replied. My tone surprised even me. It wasn't cold. It wasn't emotional. It was steady. Mark remained seated beside me, his presence quiet but unmistakable. A boundary. Ethan's eyes flicked toward him briefly, then back to me. You left your phone off, Ethan said. I didn't, I replied. I just didn't answer. The words hung between us. Clear. Intentional. He hesitated, then nodded slightly as if adjusting his approach. Okay, he said. That's fair. I wanted to make sure you were all right. There it was. Concern. Carefully packaged. Offered at the exact moment it might still work. I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Ethan shifted his weight, glancing briefly around the office as if grounding himself. You didn't come home last night, he said. The statement sounded neutral, but there was something beneath it. Expectation. I didn't feel comfortable going back, I replied. His jaw tightened slightly. Because of the motel, he asked. Mom, that was just temporary. I told you that. I held his gaze. You told me a lot of things, I said quietly. Something in my tone made him stop. Really stop. Because this time I wasn't responding the way I used to. I wasn't deflecting. I wasn't softening. I wasn't trying to protect him from the truth. I don't understand why you're making this into something it's not, he said after a moment, his voice taking on a firmer edge. I was trying to help you. Help. The word no longer carried weight. Only intention. Mark spoke, then his voice calm but precise. Mr. West, he said, perhaps it would be more productive if we focused on the facts. Ethan turned toward him, irritation flickering across his face. With all due respect, he said, this is a family matter. Mark didn't react. It became a legal matter the moment documentation like this was created, he replied, gesturing toward the folder on his desk. Ethan's eyes followed the motion, and when he saw the folder, really saw it, something shifted. A crack. Small, but undeniable. Where did you get that? He asked, his voice tightening. I answered. You left it in my suitcase. The room went still. Ethan didn't speak right away. He just stared at the folder, then at me, and in that moment, I saw it. The realization, the understanding that something he had planned so carefully had gone wrong. I didn't mean for you to see that, he said finally. The honesty of the statement was almost jarring, not because it was sincere, but because it revealed more than he intended. No, I replied. You didn't. Another silence. Then, it's not what you think, he said. The phrase came quickly, automatically, as if it had been waiting. I almost smiled, because now I understood. Then tell me what it is I said. My voice didn't rise, didn't sharpen. It simply held. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. It's just documentation, he said. Precautionary. In case something happened. Something like what I asked. He hesitated, then chose his words carefully. Mom, you've been struggling, he said. You've had moments where you've been forgetful, confused. I was worried. Worried. The word sounded hollow now. Worried enough to describe me as incapable, I asked. His expression tightened. That's not what I said. I leaned forward slightly. It's exactly what you said, I replied, tapping the folder lightly.
Right here." He looked at Mark again, then back at me. And for a moment, the performance slipped. "You don't understand how bad things have been," he said, his voice lower now. "The bills, the pressure, Lauren's hours getting cut, the mortgage." "So you decided to take control of my life?" I interrupted. The question landed harder than I expected, because it cut through everything else. Ethan's composure faltered. Just slightly. "I was trying to protect you," he said. "No," I replied quietly. "I think you were trying to solve your problems." The words hung there, sharp, unavoidable. Ethan's eyes darkened. "That's not fair," he said. "Isn't it?" I asked. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the door opened again. Lauren stepped inside. Her presence changed the energy immediately. Where Ethan had tried to maintain a balance between concern and control, Lauren didn't bother. Her expression was composed, focused, assessing. "Ethan," she said, glancing at him briefly before turning her attention to me. "Nicole." There it was again. Not Mom. Nicole. Consistent. Intentional. "You shouldn't be here," she added calmly. The statement caught me off guard. "Excuse me," I said. "This isn't necessary," she continued. "We were handling everything." Handling. The word felt colder coming from her. "I don't remember agreeing to that," I replied. She didn't hesitate. "You weren't in a position to," she said. The room went silent. Because that was the truth. Not hidden, not softened. Just stated. Raw. Clear. Ethan looked at her quickly. "Lauren." But she didn't stop. "You've been declining," she said, her eyes steady on mine. "You may not see it, but we do. Someone needed to step in." Declining? The word echoed. But this time, it didn't shake me, because I knew what it was. A narrative, a justification, a way to make something unacceptable sound necessary. "I was grieving," I said. "That's part of it," she replied, "but it's more than that." "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." Another silence. Then Ethan spoke again, more forcefully this time. "We're drowning," he said. "Do you understand that? We're barely keeping everything together, and you have resources that could help all of us." There it was. Finally. Not concern, not protection, not care. Need. And beneath it, entitlement. "You wanted my money," I said. The words didn't come out as a question. They came out as a realization. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Lauren did. "We wanted stability," she said. The distinction didn't matter, because the result was the same, and you thought the best way to get that was to make me look incapable, I asked. No answer. Because there wasn't one. Not one that could make it right. Ethan looked at me then. Really looked at me. And for a moment, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Not guilt. Not exactly. But something close. "You wouldn't have agreed otherwise," he said quietly. The honesty of it landed like a final piece falling into place. And suddenly, everything made sense. The pressure, the control, the plan. It wasn't just about money. It was about certainty, about removing resistance, about making sure the outcome happened the way they needed it to, even if it meant erasing me in the process. I leaned back in my chair slowly, not defeated, not broken,
just certain. "I think we're done here," I said. My voice was calm, clear, final. And for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't speaking as a mother trying to understand her son. I was speaking as a woman who had finally seen the truth and refused to be rewritten by it. The silence that followed my words felt different from all the others. It wasn't tense. It wasn't uncertain. It was final. Ethan didn't argue right away. Lauren didn't interrupt. Even Mark remained still, allowing the moment to settle exactly as it needed to. Because something had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. Not with explanations. Not with apologies. Not even with time. "I think we're done here." I heard my own words again in my mind, steady and clear, and for the first time, I didn't question them. Ethan let out a slow breath, running his hand across the back of his neck. "You don't mean that," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a reflex. A final attempt to pull me back into the version of myself he understood. The version that hesitated, that softened, that stayed. But I didn't. "Yes," I said quietly. His eyes searched mine, looking for something. Doubt. Emotion. A crack. But there was none, because I wasn't standing in confusion anymore. I was standing in truth. Lauren crossed her arms, her posture composed, but her expression tighter now. "You're making a mistake," she said. I almost smiled, not because it was amusing, but because it sounded so familiar. Those same words had been used on me before, in smaller ways, subtler ways. Whenever I questioned something, whenever I hesitated, whenever I didn't immediately agree. "No," I replied. "I think I've already made that mistake." The room went quiet again. Ethan stepped forward slightly this time, his voice softening once more. "Mom, we can fix this," he said. Fix. The word hung there. Empty, because I finally understood something important. This wasn't something that could be fixed. Not the way he meant. Not by pretending it hadn't happened. Not by smoothing it over with apologies or explanations. "You didn't make a mistake," he continued. "You were just overwhelmed. We were trying to help you manage things, that's all." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "That's not all." He stopped. Because this time, I wasn't going to let the narrative reset. "You didn't ask me what I needed." I continued. "You decided. You documented. You planned." My voice didn't rise, but it carried weight now. "You made arrangements for me without telling me. You described me as incapable without my knowledge. You tried to position me so you could take control." Ethan's expression tightened again. "That's not fair," he said. "It's accurate," I replied. The word landed cleanly, without emotion, without hesitation. Just truth. Mark spoke, then his tone calm but firm. "Nicole has made her position clear," he said. "Moving forward, any further discussions regarding her finances or legal standing will go through this office." Lauren's eyes flicked toward him. "You're overstepping," she said. "No," Mark replied evenly. "I'm protecting my client." Client. The word settled into the room like a boundary, because that's what it was. A line, one that had not existed before, but existed now, and would remain. Ethan exhaled sharply. "This is ridiculous," he said. "We're her family. And I am still a person," I said. The words came out before I could soften them, before I could reshape them into something gentler. But I didn't take them back, because they were true. For so long, I had allowed myself to be repositioned. Not intentionally, not consciously, but gradually, from mother to responsibility, from independent to dependent, from capable to questionable, and somewhere along the way my voice had become optional, replaceable, until now. I'm not confused, I said quietly. I'm not incapable, and I'm not yours to manage. The room held still around those words, because there was no room left for interpretation, no space for adjustment, no opportunity to redirect. Ethan looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a brief moment, I saw something break, not dramatically, not visibly, but internally, because the version of me he had been working with, the one who doubted herself, who hesitated, who allowed him to lead, was gone, and he didn't know how to navigate the version that remained. So what now, he asked. The question was quieter this time, less controlled, less certain. I took a breath, because this part mattered, not just for him, but for me. Now I said I take my life back. The words didn't feel dramatic. They felt grounded, practical, real. I'm securing my accounts, I continued. I'm working with Mark to make sure everything is protected, and I'm not returning to your house. Lauren's expression shifted. You can't be serious, she said. I am, I replied. You're overreacting, she added. No, I said again. I'm responding. Another silence. Then Ethan spoke. What about us? He asked. The question lingered. Not strategic, not calculated, just human. And for the first time since this began, I felt something in my chest shift. Because despite everything, he was still my son. And that truth didn't disappear just because everything else had changed. But neither did what he had done. We don't go back to the way things were, I said gently. The words were softer now, but no less firm. That doesn't exist anymore. He swallowed, nodded once, as if he understood that much at least. And if I try to fix it? He asked. I held his gaze. You can try, I said, but fixing it doesn't mean erasing it. That was the part he needed to understand. Not punishment, not revenge, just reality. Because some things, once done, stay done. Lauren didn't speak again. Ethan didn't argue. And slowly, they stepped back. Not dramatically, not with final words or dramatic exits. Just back. Out of the space they no longer controlled. Out of the situation they could no longer shape. And as the door closed behind them, I didn't feel the same emptiness I had felt at the motel. I didn't feel abandoned. I didn't feel lost. I felt something else. Something quieter, but stronger. Relief, because for the first time in months, maybe longer, I was no longer being managed, no longer being observed, no longer being rewritten. I was simply myself. And that was enough. The first morning in my new place began with silence. Not the kind that presses against your chest or makes you feel forgotten, but a gentler silence. The kind that allows you to hear your own thoughts without interruption. The kind that feels earned. I stood by the small kitchen window, holding a warm cup of coffee in both hands, watching the sunlight stretch slowly across the courtyard outside. The cottage community Mark had helped me find was quiet, but not lonely. There were signs of life everywhere, neighbors tending to plants, someone walking a small dog, a woman across the path waving as she passed by. It wasn't the life I had imagined for myself, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The past few months had been a process. Not a sudden transformation, not a dramatic reinvention. Just steps. Careful, steady, deliberate steps back into myself. With Mark's help, everything had been secured. My accounts, my legal standing, my autonomy. Every point of access Ethan had tried to establish had been formally revoked. Notifications were restored, controls were reset, and more importantly, there was now a clear record of what had been attempted, not as revenge, but as protection. I didn't pursue anything further. I could have. Mark had made that clear. There were options, legal consequences, actions that could have escalated the situation into something harsher, more definitive. But I chose not to. Not because what they did wasn't serious. It was. And not because I didn't feel anger. I did. But because I understood something that felt more important. I didn't need to destroy them to rebuild myself. What I needed was distance and clarity and boundaries that would hold. Ethan reached out several times in the weeks that followed. At first, the messages were careful. "Mom, can we talk? I think there's been a misunderstanding. I just want to explain." I read them. All of them. But I didn't respond. Not immediately. Because for once I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. That difference mattered more than anything. Eventually, the messages changed. They became quieter, less controlled, less structured. "I'm sorry. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't realize how it looked. And finally, I miss you." That one stayed with me, because beneath everything else, there was still something real there, something human. But it didn't erase what had happened, and it didn't change what needed to happen next. When I did respond, it was simple. "I'm safe. I'm well. I need time." Nothing more, nothing less. He didn't reply right away, and when he did, it was just one line. "I understand. I don't know if he truly did. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. But that wasn't something I needed to solve anymore, because understanding was no longer my responsibility." Tasha visited me one afternoon not long after I moved in. She stood at the door with a small bag in her hand, her smile warm but slightly uncertain. "I wasn't sure if this would be weird," she said. "It's not," I replied immediately, stepping aside to let her in. She laughed softly. "Good." We sat at the small table by the window, the same sunlight filling the room in a way that felt almost symbolic. She had brought pastries, simple ones, but thoughtful. "I used to bring these to the program sometimes," she said. "I figured it felt right." I smiled. "It does." We talked for hours. Not about the motel, not about Ethan, but about everything else. Her life, her journey, the years between the girl I had once helped and the woman sitting in front of me now. "You don't realize how much that moment mattered," she said at one point. "When you helped me, when you believed me." I looked at her, really looked at her, at the strength in her posture, at the clarity in her voice, at the life she had built. "I think I'm starting to," I said softly, because now I understood something I hadn't before. Kindness doesn't disappear. It doesn't fade into nothing. It stays. It moves through time in ways we don't always see, and sometimes it comes back, exactly when we need it most. Before she left, Tasha hesitated at the door. "If you ever need anything," she began. I smiled. I know I said, and I did, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone, not in the way I had before. Not in the way that felt like absence. This was different. This was space. And space, I had learned, wasn't something to fear. It was something to grow into. As for Ethan, I don't know what our future looks like. Not fully. We've spoken a few times since then. Carefully, slowly, each conversation measured. Not cold, not closed, but not the same. Because some things don't return to what they were. And maybe they're not supposed to. I don't hate him. That might surprise some people, but I don't. I see him more clearly now. His fear, his pressure, his choices. None of it excuses what he did, but understanding it helps me let go of something heavier than anger. And that feels like freedom. I still love him in a way that has changed, in a way that has boundaries, in a way that no longer sacrifices me to sustain it. And that is something I never thought I would learn this late in life. But I did. Standing there that morning, coffee in hand, sunlight stretching across a life I had rebuilt piece by piece, I realized something simple. I had been abandoned. Yes, but I had also been found. Not by accident, not by luck, but by truth. And once you find that, everything else begins to follow. Life has a quiet way of revealing truths we don't want to see, especially when they come from the people we trust the most. What happened to me wasn't just about betrayal. It was about how easily love can be mistaken for control, and how important it is to recognize the difference before it's too late. Growing older doesn't mean losing your voice. It doesn't mean becoming less capable, less valuable, or less deserving of respect. And grief, no matter how deep, does not make you weak. It makes you human. But when someone begins to use your vulnerability against you, that's no longer care. That's manipulation. What I learned is this: you are allowed to question. You are allowed to say no. And you are absolutely allowed to protect your life even from the people you love. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that family doesn't always act like family, but that doesn't mean you have to lose yourself trying to hold on to them. And sometimes, the kindness you gave long ago comes back in ways you never expected through a stranger who remembers you when you've forgotten yourself. So I want to ask you, have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to make you doubt yourself? What would you have done if you were in my place? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. I truly want to hear your story. And if this journey meant something to you, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue sharing stories that remind us of our strength.